Hi, I'm Stacey Marbrey, programmer for Slamdance Film Festival, a festival for and by filmmakers. Slamdance has proven year after year that independent grassroots communities take risks on bold talent and launch careers that change the industry. Our artist-led community continues to discover and nurture fellow creators through various programs throughout the year, focusing on new writers, digital and interactive arts, grants and mentorships, DIY film education, film screenings, and of course the Slamdance Film Festival, where today's guest, Merawi, won this year's Audience Award for his debut feature film, Residue. A film about Jay, a young man returning to Washington, D.C., his home after many years away, to write a script about his African-American neighborhood, specifically Q Street, and the folks in the community, only to discover that things have changed drastically. Residue is visually stunning, emotionally dynamic, poetry emotion, an ode to families, Black men, neighborhoods, as the film explores the nuances of gentrification and the difficulties of returning home. Hi, Merawi. Many congratulations on winning the festival's Audience Award in January and your international debut at Venice Film Festival last week. How was the screening how was the international screening with audiences? Did they get your message?
Yeah, I mean it was incredible when we were at Venice Film Festival. I think that our film really sparked an incredible debate, that we saw on the last day. They had this really interesting public jury debate. And there were two other films that they were, it was three total that they were deciding between. And it was clear that as soon as they got to our film, really the emotions came out, full swing, and people were, we had people who were die hard, fighting for it, and people who were absolutely against it. And, the type of division it created, I think, was just an interesting kind of reaction to the film that I just thought, it was amazing to see, that it had the power to get people up out of their seats in that way, this far away from America, that these issues, which they don't deal with directly in the way that it's spoken to in the film, still, kind of has that potential, around the world. It was beautiful. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's beautiful also to see, folks, people internationally to see, what's happening in Black communities and just what's happening in communities, period, with our type of movements, of people entering into communities and all of that good stuff. I don't want to stop there. Residue has also been picked up by Ava DuVernay's Array and her distribution company, and it's now streaming on Netflix, and I applaud you. So congratulations yet again. And I don't want to stop there. One of the questions that I had while watching the film is, Residue's commentary is not specifically, it doesn't specifically mention gentrification, yet shows how it's changing with the various tonal conversations between white and Black folks, and especially white folks who are more removed and observant in communities, or I should say gentrified communities. To me, the film is about, being visible and recognizing history and who lives in these communities. I would like for you to discuss, DC as a character. You being a DC native, can you also discuss the history of DC and the Black neighborhoods and specifically Q Street?
I think so. The difficult thing about can you hear me?
Yeah, I was like, there's a lot of questions.
No,
Sorry.
I wanted to just kind of barrel down on this fact of trying to make a film that kind of takes up space. The truth is that in DC, Black people and white people, or DC natives and this new gentrifying population live in two different worlds. They live in two different universes. Kind of on top of each other. And it's totally possible to exist in DC and have no clue what's happening to the Black people in the city. And I think that, you know, it's really only, you know, kind of this white gentrifying class that has that privilege of not knowing what Black people in the city are going through. You know, Black people, you know, we kind of, you know, have no choice but to know what white people are up to in the city. You know what I mean? Because it's so directly consequential to our, you know, everyday living. So the film really, of course, is about, you know, the Black, you know, communities in DC. But, you know, at a certain point, it becomes necessary for Jay, for example, to kind of cross the boundary and kind of make himself felt and known, you know, in this kind of scenario or arrangement, which kind of so thoroughly invisibilizes him and his community. You know, as you see in the end of the film, the way he kind of explodes into their world as well. It's interesting that, you know, I can look back and say this, you know, so clearly, because in the making of it, that was never so clear, you know, a direction for us. You know, it was never so clear that that's what we were trying to do. Really, all I can say for certain in the making of the film is that I was chasing this urgent requirement within myself to document as much about my community as I knew it, as quickly as possible before, you know, it was too late. And in many ways, you go back now, many of the places that we shot are gone. Some of the actors, you know, we lost one of our actors, Mama Hasnatu, who played Delonte's grandmother. She passed away, you know, after our first summer of filming. She had been battling cancer, unbeknownst to any of us, you know. Yeah, you know, that was my drive, you know. But looking back, it's clear, it's interesting how, you know, this is what we were doing, you know, is really kind of documenting this invisibilized population in a way that is requiring people to notice it, you know.
At what point did you feel this urgency? I mean, I know that you went to school, you went to USC, you know, I mean, at what point in your filmmaking journey and going to school, did you feel the urgency to document, to make a narrative, to make this film?
Interesting. I mean, when I left DC, I had no intention, you know, I don't think I felt it like that because, you know, when you're in the thick of it, you can't really appreciate, you know, your city or kind of, you know, your home. And being in LA gave me the space and distance that I needed to really, you know, one, become homesick and, you know, two, really see that the West Coast actually didn't provide all the answers that I needed, wasn't able to satiate everything that I was feeling inside after all, you know, despite what I thought. And so, you know, after my first year, you know, I didn't go back for, winter break or anything like that. I spent a whole year away. And when I came back to DC with all these emotions, you know, kind of swirling, and then saw that, you know, the city that I had really not really appreciated, to see it really, you know, you appreciate something more when it's leaving you. So to see it changing so quickly really threw me off, and put me into survival mode of like, oh, this is, life and death, and, you know, and it's immediate and requires immediate action. And the fact that it took me a whole year to write the script was, you know, stressful. I was, you know, kind of disturbed throughout the whole writing process, waiting to go back to film.
I mean, so what was, you know, so being away, what was the journey like? I mean, what was, you know, did you start writing the script right away, or was there a lot of time, processing and, you know, journaling and diarying, and, you know, what was the process? Like, how did you start writing? How did you find your creative team and to really bring in the story?
Well, I had an outline pretty much before I, you know, left DC that summer. You know, I started writing that summer, and I returned to LA with an outline. You know, it changed drastically, but the idea was the roadmap was in place. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, over the course of that school year, you know, I started just filling it in. And once it got, hefty enough to show, you know, I started showing it around, you know, of course, to my classmates, you know, my cohort, my, you know, comrades, really, you know, other Black students in the white film school I went to. and people who I really trusted to really, give me honest feedback, including my parents. And yeah, it got to the point where the script at that stage wasn't really working on its own. It was missing some things, and I think that um, I came back home. I think winter break in my second year, and I think that's kind of, I forget what it was, but at a certain point it merged with the story that had been, but kind of in the back of my mind for many, many years about, a friend who I had heard some bad news about, and, who up to, to my knowledge, nobody knew where he was. And so this idea, once it was infused into the script, it became interesting.
Yeah, yeah. You had mentioned, coming back home and talking with your parents and being at home. Your parents are prolific filmmakers, and it's how what is the journey with them being not just their child, but also being a collaborative, as well as a fellow filmmaker. Like, what's the experience of them seeing you as an auteur, them being an auteur in, with themselves?
It's interesting because DC, Sankofa, my family's bookstore in Washington D.C., and it's also kind of where my parents edit and things like that, and manage kind of the film related things. It's kind of a dead zone for kind of the things that don't really matter. Typical kind of let's say superficial, filmmaking concerns, Hollywood, all this kind of stuff, it really, it is a no-fly zone for things that don't really matter in our and I think that my parents are very good at cutting straight through to really get to, kind of the honesty in a story or the honesty in a process. And so when I was in LA, I was kind of taking in these things, at the film school I went to, which is a direct feeder to Hollywood. You take in some things, your ego grows a little bit, and you start to stray away from what really matters. And the structure itself starts to reflect, Hollywood films in general, which may not be organic to your story. It's 3-act kind of structure. So when I came back, it was, an interesting process of getting recalibrated, by my parents and other people in the community to really say, like, what story are you really trying to tell and how? Outside of that, they're both film, they've taught film at Howard University. My father was a professor there for 40 years. And so he's able to really kind of disconnect both my parents, between, oh, you're our son, or you're a filmmaker that we're trying to help, or that we're trying to, coach or whatever. And so we would have screenings, when I would come back with cuts of the film, and like that, it would just be like, at school or whatever, we would sit, watch the film and discuss, with, rigor, kind of different decisions that were, happening in the film in the post-production phase. In the production phase, they were basically hands off, kind of just watching from the sidelines.
Well, cheering you on as a parent to a child, which is
my mom certainly. My dad, he's got his own way of being, so, but you could tell that he was watching intently, which is, his way of cheering you on.
Mm-hmm. Great mentors. I mean, did you, I read about the notion of triangular cinema, and is this something that you learned from home, or is this your own philosophy? Like, can you explain, triangular cinema?
Triangular cinema is a development, out of, my father, his time in UCLA, I'm sure his cohorts as well, but it's something that I learned, from studying him. It's not something that I, could say that he sat me down to talk to me about. This is actually when I went to LA, I started learning more and more about my parents, as I started to kind of, in an interesting way, retrace their footsteps. But Yeah, triangular cinema is basically the idea that the filmmaker, that there's an invaluable relationship, between the filmmaker, their community, you know, or their audience, or people who would see their films, and the critic. And I think that the idea is that the critic, not in the term in general terms that we think of it today, but the idea that someone, a cultural custodian, someone who makes it their life's work to you know usher and preserve and you know um, uh, protect culture in general and bring that rigor to that type of work, their relationship to the filmmaker, to the artist, and one that is, kind of constantly, where all these three sections, the filmmaker, the audience, and the cultural, critic, are constantly engaged with each other. You make a film not in a silo, but you make a film and you show it to the audience, and you subject it, to that confrontation with an audience, and have and their feedback, also is required, is crucial to your growth as a filmmaker. The audience being people who aren't necessarily film people, per se, but who bring a popular, kind of mass, kind of reaction to your project, by someone who's, not steeped in that world, but the critic, is the one who brings that kind of film knowledge, and education to it. So I think like this triangular relationship between these three, is the idea being everybody is improved by such a relationship, and everybody kind of benefits from these kind of intellectual engagement, intellectual and cultural engagement.
Well, kind of expanding on that, have you shown the film in DC, and what has been the reaction? Has there been any community engagement and conversation around, the very topic that you're talking about?
Yeah, I had a family and friends screening in DC right when the film was made and right before we went to Slamdance. And before that, for years, people were like, yo, where's the movie? What's happening with the film? And all this kind of thing. And I think I held on to like this really nervous kind of expectation of how people would receive the film, especially in DC, wondering, is it representing DC well enough? Despite my best intentions to keep these ideas out of my mind, or these worries, that happens, wondering how people will react to it. But in the screening, yeah, people from, the filmmakers came, their families, the Sankofa community came, and also the Q Street community came. So it was like this kind of triple layered community present. And it was incredible. People were absolutely touched, and kind of, tears were shed, and, conversations were had where people just claim in a way, claim the film, kind of for their own. Was an older gentleman I'll never forget who was just saying, this is our story. Even though I didn't know him closely, he was from Q Street. He was just saying, this is how we grew up. Or this is this is the story of Q Street as I know it. And I don't know, I felt I'd gotten to a point where I was able to kind of compartmentalize my insecurities, of like, do I have what it takes to to tell a story about this community, in a way that allowed me to feel that I had grown from from such an experience, and that I had achieved something for myself and achieved something from a larger community. Now to the point where I do believe that every community should sprout its own, kind of storytellers, by its own standards and kind of dictates, rather than, of course, people coming in from parachuting in from Hollywood and all that kind of shit. But, every community should have the ability, or should be given the ability to kind of tell its own story, or should take that. By any means, to me, the Delante character is kind of a crystallization of this idea that, outsiders should be met with, suspicion at all times, to really be suspicious of their intentions, and their motivations. And also not only to say, that you may be coming to exploit us for, these stories, because of course, Black pain is so easily exploitable, but to also say that, you know, you may not be best equipped. We can tell our story, in fact, you know, for our own selves, if we so choose. You know, the dark reality is that Hollywood is prepared to go in. They have the resources to any community to tell, you know, that community story for them before they can ever amass the resources required to do it. And, you know, I think Delonte's character is my hope for every Black community to say, nah, you know, we don't trust you. We're not taken in, you know, by the lights and the cameras and the equipment and all that shit. You know, we think that we can tell our story better than you can.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree, and I do hope and pray that, you know, this does happen. To everybody who's listening, please pick up a camera and start telling, you know, stories about your community, you know, whether it is a Black community or what have you, you know, because the communities are changing, you know, and histories are being bulldozed over, in a literal and metaphor, you know, in a literal and metaphorical way. So, you know, thank you for thank you for starting this movement. I'm going to call it a movement, but thank you for starting this.
Right on.
To kind of pivot a little bit away from.
But also, just to add, you know, this is really just a continuation. It's really in the truest sense a continuation, you know, of my parents and their contemporaries and the people who came before them, but certainly my parents and their contemporaries, you know, Black filmmakers who struggled, you know, mightily, you know, to kind of lay the framework that I'm benefiting from, Ava DuVernay is benefiting from, that we're all, this legacy that we're all standing in, you know, to push, you know, Black, the distribution and creation of Black stories even further.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because yeah, it's very true. I stand on shoulders as well. So, you know, you had mentioned, you know, filmmaking is not in a, you know, silo, and, you know, I really want to talk about your relationship with your creative team, and you know, how, you know, the film is the cinematography is amazing. And, you know, yeah, it's just really, I haven't seen something like this in quite some time, you know, and I don't want to call it experimental, but awe-inspiring. And I wanted to, you know, I wanted to know what the relationship was, and the creative decisions that were made between you and your DP, and, you know, and also the marriage between, you know, sight and sound. But starting with, you know, your relationship with the DP.
Yeah, so first, Mark Jiva Rutnam is my cinematographer, or, you know, he you know, really my brother. Is really a brotherhood force, and, you know, the hot, you know, DC, you know, humid climate, you know, full of mosquitoes and all that stuff. We really, we worked very hard, you know, in that, especially in that first summer. And Mark is an absolute soldier who came on board really 3 days before we started filming, which is really crazy to think about, that there was no wind up, no pre-production time for him, you know. He had really no prep time. In the short amount of time that we had, we went over references, you know, reference images that I was able to collect, you know, and the, about DC at that time period, you know, DC in the 90s, which is a very specific color palette in my mind, you know what I mean? Certain songs, of course, Go-Go is at the heart of it all. Certain, you know, he would ask, you know, okay, this opening when young Jay comes out of the house, is that more like a this kind of song or that kind of song? I'm like, nah, it's more like this kind of song, you know, throw some Chuck Brown at him and, you know, things like that. And, you know, he really works very hard to, he really worked very hard to get inside, you know, my mind and download as much as he could from me. In the time that he had, you know, because of course I was focused on other things often, and he would, you know, kind of get what he could, you know. And so I think, you know, the fact that he was able to photograph this film in the way that he did is just an absolute testament to just his awesome abilities as a cinematographer, you know. And I don't know, you know, like I'm excited, you know, for the next film, as he says, the next film, just to see kind of how he grows. But I would say that, you know, it's even more exciting to think that in the second summer when we returned, just how dangerous we were in terms of the amount, the level to which we were able to sync up, you know, and the, you know, the level to which our kind of rapport had grown. You know, some of the most amazing kind of shots are shot from that time period, you know, from that second summer. You know, the shot of, you know, when after he finds out about the death of his friend, you know, and he's in his apartment and Blue comes over to him and hands him a towel, that like green, blue light thing that, you know, and then of course the last shot with the couple on the rooftop, which I think is us at the height of our powers, you know, that was the second summer, you know. And we had interpersonal beef, you know, at points, which is even crazier to think that we were able to achieve that, you know, despite, you know, certain issues that we were going through. And to me, it's just like, he's an incredible contributor to this project. You know, he's an absolute soldier. He colored the film himself, by the way, because once again, we didn't have much in the way of resources, but yeah, our working relationship is really next level.
You can tell because it's all around, you know, you spoke his language, he spoke your language, and it was amazingly beautiful. I'm going to put it up to some questions, as there's some questions that are coming in from our audience. Let's see, your story is drenched in indie means by any means necessary spirit. Can you speak to your Slamdance Array Netflix? Can you speak about your Slamdance Netflix Array Slamdance experience?
Yeah, sure. Tongue twister. I mean, we got into Slamdance. Slamdance happened in January. Me and Mark were literally like, because, you know, what they needed us to deliver the film in time for the festival, we put in 2 weeks, two or 3 weeks of just like nonstop, you know, because I had to mix the film and he had to color the film. And so he was working, you know, downstairs at Sankofa. I was working upstairs, and it was just no sleep, no nothing. And I had a full-time job at the time. It was crazy. It was insane. But, you know, we kind of pushed it to the limit to get it to Slamdance on time. I don't know if I ever told y'all about that. Y'all put us through a lot of stress. But we got it there in time. Slamdance was amazing. It was incredibly received. We got the audience award for Best Narrative. Obinna Nwachukwu, who plays the lead character, who's our lead actor, who plays Jay. He got the Best Actor award. We got special mention for the Grand Jury Prize. And then kind of, you know, when the press release for that dropped, you know, everything, you know, kind of went crazy. We got a lot of attention out of that. And also we had, in the hopes that Array would be in Utah, perhaps for Sundance or Slamdance, we invited them to one of our screenings, and they showed up to our second screening. Yeah, they were there. It was you know, pretty, you know, well populated kind of screening. You know, I think that they were impressed with the film, but also, you know, with the audience's reaction. And so we just started talking after that. And then, you know, fast forward to now, you know, we're on Netflix September 17th. When that happened, you know, even in the run up to that, you know, well, first we went from Slamdance the whole year, every festival just getting cut down left and right because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that we had our world premiere at Slamdance right before COVID was it was the luckiest thing, you know, the most crucial kind of element of this whole puzzle. Mm-hmm. You know, because so many incredible films have been paused, completely just kind of in limbo, waiting to see what will happen, you know, when theaters will open up or when festivals will come back. And that's kind of what happened to us. We had, I think we were shortlisted at Cannes, you know, for main competition. Even the Directors Fortnight, I think we got in, and then they were canceled. And then the incredible programmers from Directors Fortnight, you know, they taught, you know, at different festivals, and they were just, you know, they thought that it would be a good recommendation to Venice, and that's kind of how that happened. Venice, you know, was the only festival that was really, you know, able to, because of their timing and, you know, I guess other elements, make a festival happen in person. and they really wanted to do it. And so we got into Venice Days. The festival happened. You know, it was kind of, you know, Slamdance all over again. You know, we had a lot of love. And yeah, then Netflix happened, and, you know, kind of here we are now.
I mean, it's a great distribution journey. I mean, it's like, it's everyone's dream, you know, to go from like screening, start the conversations, and then here, you know, having the premiere on Netflix on last Friday. So another question from we have is, the use of sound in your film is so incredible. Can you talk about the sound design, the process, and your vision?
Yeah. So I was writing certain sound, you know, a good deal of sound elements into the script because one of my focuses in film school was sound. And the school I went to, their sound department is, you know, I think their best department. And so I would say I was well trained in sound, and it really gave me a new appreciation for the broader potentials of filmmaking. And it's also the way that, you know, we were able to get around expensive production elements, you know, police cars, drive-by shootings, you know, uniforms, you know, prisons, all these things we were able to kind of solve using sound. And so, you know, that was the first thing. The other thing is that, you know, my memories, you know, are very specific to like the sounds. I remember the bucket drummers at the, you know, at the top of the block, you know, the crickets, the, you know, cicadas, all those things, you know, the sounds of like all the kids kind of shouting, playing at night, you know, the go-go music, you know, playing out of people's, you know, kind of radios or windows and cars passing by. It was just real specific. And, you know, I just felt that the film should have all those things, but also, you know, specifically, you know, regarding the sounds of the city, I felt like I had to document those things because they were, you know, like I was telling someone earlier today, you know, the way they document, you know, the extinction of like certain animals, you know, because you can't hear them in the rainforest anymore, and you hear a recording from like 30 years ago, and there's like hella, you know, bullfrogs was the example I used. Like there's a lot of bullfrogs in this recording, but now if you listen to that same rainforest or whatever, there's less, and you know, they use that to chart the extinction of certain species. I just felt like that's what happened to my neighborhood. You go there now, it is quiet, eerily quiet. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so pristine. It's so, you know, it's just like, it's devoid of really any kind of culture, you know what I mean? And especially, you know, DC culture. And it just kind of threw me off. And so I just felt like I had to capture any amount that I could that was left, you know, that kind of DC culture. So really for me, it's an archival document, you know, the sound design.
Yeah. Another question is, how much of the film is scripted and how much is improvised? Do the actors bring their own experience to the film, and is it mostly written from your own perspective?
I mean, there's certain key, you know, sections that are from, you know, my very specific, you know, well, the whole thing is from my experience, but I think that I try my best to adhere to like the DC way of talking, DC accent, and all these kinds of things that I would write into the script. But in the end, the script was just a, you know, guideline. And, you know, the first thing I told the actors is to just say it how you would say it, you know, to use your own language and to not be worried about staying on script. You know, we would, you know, in the time that we had, do quick, you know, exercises or, you know, rehearsals to, you know, get the idea of the scene in their mind. But often we didn't have that much time. But, you know, to shout out to these actors who were able to kind of lock in, you know, the emotional kind of content of each scene to be able to deliver it. But in terms of the improvisation, I think that like in the first takes, you know, one or two takes, you could see, you know, I think that we adhered more so to the script as written, but you know, on like a third take, you know, you could see them being more free and open, you know, improvising and things like that. And I tried to encourage improvisation everywhere we could. And there's a couple of key lines which were totally improvised that I just thought were, you know, incredible. And yeah, I think that I would say the story, the plot, that is all, kind of as written, but delivery points are improvised widely.
Were your actors, was your talent, are they from DC, or like how did you get them? How did you cast?
Yeah, pretty much everybody except Talene Stewart, who plays Blue. She's from New Jersey. Pretty much everybody else is from DC or the DMV area. We cast. I landed in DC with nobody casted except Dennis, who I called on the way to DC. Dennis Lindsay, who plays Delonte, was my college roommate, and he volunteered on the spot. And then we had to cast 40 something roles, and that was our whole task of pre-production. OB he has done theater before, and he was one of the only people who could give us 2 weeks straight, which is what we needed, for the lead role. He's the type of person who wants to act, so he designed his life around the film. And other people was just recommendations, family, friends, and at Sankofa, a lot of people passed through to the bookstore or the cafe, so we were grabbing people who would come in for a cup of coffee if they had the right age or look or the right kind of age kids. But some people were cast right off the street. There's a scene with these three guys are heckling or speaking disrespectfully to his girlfriend, to Blue. They're at this like construction site, and kind of fight almost breaks out and stuff. And those dudes were passing by. Our actors really hadn't showed up for that scene, and so these two guys, one of them, he's in there, the one with the backpack. That's my neighbor. But the other two, they were passing by as we were about to shoot. And I was like, yo, do y'all want to be in a movie? And they were like, yeah, hell yeah. And one of them just happened to have on a white mask. People keep asking, like what was the significance of the mask? But it's really just what he was wearing. Mm-hmm. And so, we of course left it in there.
I mean, I think that there's the flavor of the film, like you really capture it, especially the three brothers that are on the stoop. I call them the choir.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's great. It's like this felt like, I've only been to DC a handful of times, but it felt like like this was part of the neighborhood. Like they were fixtures, and so
those are my neighbors, and the brother with the dreadlocks, he's from another neighborhood. He's the son of Mama Hasanatu, who played Miss Cook. Yeah. And he's been around, productions. He's familiar with cameras and stuff. So he was kind of my plant, for these other brothers who have never really, been in, in front of a camera or anything like that. And so, that, if you want to talk about improvisation, that was the whole section, the whole last part of that dialogue about, oh, his mama fine. Yeah, hell yeah, she is. Well, that whole part was completely improvised and had nothing to do with the script. We just kept the camera rolling because every time they would talk, it was just golden. So yeah, I call them the old heads in the credits, but yeah, choir works too.
Yeah. Another question we have is, we all need mentors in our lives, and it's great to hear about the roles your mom and dad have played in yours. Can you tell us more about your dad's 3 pillars of filmmaking, and how that influenced your work?
Yeah, I mean, so this thing about triangular cinema, again, the filmmaker, the community, and the critic, really means that, like, me as a filmmaker, I can't just make a film and just throw it out into the world and not be held accountable to how, people receive it. And I think that there's 2 different types of people who can receive it. There are people who understand film, or have studied film, and there are people who, have not, kind of just everyday people who do other things other than film, who will have a much more organic and natural response to it. So that's kind of separation between the critic and the audience, and the community. But also the community is also somebody who, has a certain relationship to you, and I think that's important as well in the way that they respond to the film. But I'll say that, like, for Residue, it's important that I made the film and then I put it out and show it to the community, one, which helped make it, because if without the community, the film would not have been possible because we had no resources. And what we lacked in resources, we made up for in community. Crew and locations and food and all these things that people came together to help us do. And so I have to be held responsible. I have to be held accountable because if I make a film, I could make a film exploitative to them or that misrepresents or that all these kinds of things, and they have to have the opportunity to say, hey, we have been misrepresented by this work, or we feel that this is this or this is that, for my own growth and also for theirs. If I have some a response to to what to their criticism or whatever, or even to appreciate, if it's not criticism, to even appreciate it and see that they have appreciated it, or to see them claim this film. And I think that and then you also have to subject it to learned kind of film educated eyes as well, for the craft and kind of for the craft of it as well. And also then the community and the critic have to also have their confrontation as well, or their interaction, where they are also brought up to the craft, or they have the opportunity to have their own film literacy increased, or by what they see the critic, how he engages with the work. And then he has to also be brought down, to the level of the community. There's like this kind of back and forth dialectic between all three sections of that triangle, and no one really is taking, kind of the, taking any type of, control or priority or whatever. Kind of all three sections are critical to, kind of this mutual improvement of people.
It's a call and response, I think.
Yeah.
And and there's no end or beginning. It's just everybody, responding to each other. I have a personal my question and my comment, and one of my thoughts is that the exposition of the jail scene, the conversation, really it brought me to tears. Like when I watched that scene, I got goosebumps. And it was really like, I have never seen, like I'm getting emotional right now. I haven't really seen this type of like Black love between men, between Black men like this kind of conversation. And in cinema, and and I wanted to know, like the reasoning, with this, like how did you come with the juxtaposition? Like what made you want to just tell the story, in that particular way versus straight on? I guess that within the editing.
Yeah. Well, one thing is I witnessed from a young age kind of the destruction that prison, kind of wreaks, the havoc it wreaks on relationships, family relationships, like family ties, and I think the fact that families are forced to kind of try and relate to each other across the span of decades, over something as dead as a phone line, what I mean? These limits, these expensive phone calls and all that kind of shit. And I think that really soured me, at an early age, to this, the whole carceral system in general, the United States kind of way of doing things. I felt that there must be ways to transcend that. There must be ways that people, kind of, exchange, real human emotion, despite those limitations. That's one thing. The other thing is, for the most part, though, as I was writing that script, I was emotional because it was. I have my own big brother that's locked up, and for me, it's it was a question of what will I say to him when I see him. And in fact, I found him, right before we went to shooting, online somehow. And I knew that, when I would go to shoot and then I would visit him after. And so for me in writing the scene, I wanted to see, and explore for myself what I would say to him, you know, how it would relate, how would the conversation go, what are the things that we would talk about, and you know, that's kind of where it comes out of, you know, our shared memories. And yeah, I can't say that I was, you know, setting out to tell us, you know, this is black love between, you know, two men, and to be a shining example for other black men to, you know, to emulate. For me, I was trying to just figure out, you know, my own situation. And also, you know, it's interesting, when I did go to visit him, the first thing we talked about was the mountains.
Mm. Wow. It was touching. You know, I will say it's my favorite thing, and I watched it many times.
Thank you. Thank you.
Another question that we have is imagine that making this, I imagine that making this film with the community and resources you had meant a lot of on-the-fly decisions and making do moments. Is there anything in particular that came through the process that was a pleasant addition or a gift to the film that was not initially planned?
Yeah, where do I even start? You know, from start to finish, the whole thing was just kind of a collection of coincidences and lucky moments and gifts from the ancestors. Um, whew, I'll tell you one. There's the scene between, you know, when Mike's mother finds out the bad news, you know, and that we shot in the rain. I always felt that I would, you know, I felt that that scene would benefit, you know, from being shot in the rain. And so it was a scene that, and it was also a scene I was afraid to shoot, to be quite honest, because I didn't want anybody to come outside of their house and see me shooting this scene, which is real for my community. And I just felt very exploitative, you know, to be honest with you. And I was kind of self-conscious about it. So it was a scene that we held on to, you know, we held in our back pockets, so to speak. And so just in case if it rains, you know, one, for the emotion intensity of the rain, but two, also selfishly, you know, to shoot by cover of rain.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day, you know, near the end of the production, we saw that there was rain on the, you know, on the forecast. And the only problem was it was supposed to rain all day, and we had 5 other scenes to shoot that didn't require rain. And, or maybe 4. And so we just sat out there and said, fuck it, let's just see what happens, you know. If we get rained out, we get rained out. So we started shooting. And it's crazy because the sky held up that entire day, right up until the moment that we finished the last scene before we needed it. And when we started shooting the scene with Mike's mother, who was my mother, by the way, the sky just opened up. It was crazy. And you know, I'm telling the truth, because if you see the scene that we shot right before Mike's mother scene was the scene where we meet Mike's mother and Mike outside of the truck. When Mike comes, he greets Jay's father, Reggie, and he's asking him who's in, who's out. And he's like, you got to stay out this time. If you notice in that scene, you know, thunder starts rumbling a little bit in the distance when Mike's mother comes to the window. And it's just mind blowing. You know, it gets a little bit darker. The wind starts blowing. It's just mind blowing how much of like it is, you know, kind of a foreshadowing effect that this kind of incoming rain caused for that scene. We finished shooting that. We went straight into, you know, the next scene. It started raining. And this next scene, you know, Mark and our first assistant camera at the time, they were like, yo, we actually can't shoot this right now. You know, the rain, it's thunder, you know, lightning. It is dangerous to shoot if the storm itself is within 10 miles of the production. Just, you know, kind of, you know, it's like a union kind of thing. He's not union. It wasn't a union project, but it was just a rule that they knew from, you know, union gigs, and, you know, for safety of our actors and all that. So I was like, okay. So they say basically every time thunder strikes or lightning strikes, you count 10 seconds. Or every time lightning strikes, you start counting. And if the thunder comes 10 seconds after, then it's 10 miles away. Basically, every second after the lightning strikes is a mile, you know, roughly speaking. of you in the distance to the storm. And so, the lightning hit and the thunder hit, basically saying that the storm was right on top of us. So we just kind of chilled out for a little bit. I made an announcement to everybody what we had to do and all this kind of stuff, and we're waiting. And then people are starting to get comfortable just chilling. And the next lightning hits, and the thunder is literally 10 seconds away. In fact, more than 10 seconds. So that storm was moving. So we're like, yo, everybody, we're shooting now. So, we go out there, it was the most painful thing as a director I had to do up to that point was to direct my mother to do this scene because it's very real for her. She wasn't even supposed to be there. In fact, our actor fell through that day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's another crazy thing. She was a no-show. My mother was in her car about to go get her or to go find her somewhere in the city. We didn't even know where she was. And I was like, Ma, I actually need you to do it. There's no time to go see what's up with this lady. And so, she was like, okay, I did it. But I'll do it. But, it was a bit of a struggle because, it's very real for her. And so if you watch that scene, she's not really acting at all. The entire story of this film is something that she experienced living on Q Street, helping to raise these boys, these children and watching them grow up only to be cut down, in the ways that we are, left and right. And this scene especially. And so we shot it, and there was an issue with the camera because of the placement, so I had to ask her to do it again. And she just looked at me like, yeah, what, I don't know. She was just in disbelief. And we went again, but the rain had gone, and she had no more left in her. And so really, what you see is the first take.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a gift. Those were both.
Yeah. Yeah. Compared to what we thought we were getting, the way it turned out, I wasn't able to appreciate the power of it until months later, because what I thought the shot that we were lining up was much in my mind different, but I didn't see the gift of it until much later.
That's always the case, like when you take a step back, and look at your picture.
Absolutely.
So our last question is, what advice do you have for current film students trying to find their voice and their tribe? The question, and another question is, could you speak to how much of your film education, formal and informal, was leaned on versus thrown out the window?
Well, I don't know. It's always weird when people ask you for advice because I just know, I'm still early in this as well, so, but I can say that if, what we achieved was interesting to you or something that you would like, to also try and, try, I would say the most important thing for me has been, this constant refusal to wait on anything or anybody. And so I would say, what we just say, green light yourself. And we say green light yourself at all times and under all conditions. And I think that is invaluable. And, the more you apply it, I think the more progress, or the more we applied it, the more progress we saw. In terms of finding your tribe, I think it's the same thing. I think you find your tribe in action, by doing the things that you want to do, by shooting films. And by shooting Residue, we found more people who are interested in shooting, who are interested in community filmmaking, in the process of making this project. Film students, I think that like film school is kind of a destabilizing environment, in the ways that I've seen it. And so sometimes, it's hit or miss. Sometimes you'll find people, who align with you, but often you find people who are, also not interested in going outside the boundaries of what they're being taught, despite, what we all say about trying to, break the rules and things like that. And so I think that like, it is a constant kind of struggle to find people who align with what you're trying to do. But I think it is in the action of doing films, making films, that you'll find people who align with your way of making films, In terms of finding your voice, this one, which is important to me, I'm sorry to cut you off, in terms of finding your voice, the most critical thing for me has been to protect my own inherent, my own amateurish instincts. You know what I mean? To listen to those over and above the ways of operating that I was, that they attempt, that I was taught, that they teach at, at the school I went to. And I think that, like, the more you listen to your own amateurish instincts, what you're doing is you're really chasing and following what will become your voice. You know what I mean? Your own kind of whispers, that you need to develop, because it's very small and delicate. If you haven't listened to it, you want to develop it into a strong, kind of bellowing voice, after a certain, after a while. And, I think taking on this 3-act structure, Hollywood kind of things, threatens to destroy your voice. It's no secret that, film schools push out a lot of kind of cookie cutter films and projects and filmmakers, because in the end, what they're doing is just, replicating the same types of storytelling techniques. So yeah. Yeah, I think that kind of answers the second question about, the educational versus, the formal and informal. It was the same thing. It was just kind of like, kind of hearing what they were saying, but I stopped taking writing classes early on. I stopped taking directing classes early on because I felt that that's kind of where, this kind of delicate, voice that I was trying to nurture could be squashed, could be really destroyed. And so I focused more on sound, the technical aspects, kind of sound, cinematography, producing, and because I felt writing and directing is really time in the seat, time spent doing those things where you really develop those skills. So I just felt I could do those on my own projects. And yeah, Residue was the best film school ever, ever.
Yes. Well, it was definitely a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom and, in kind of, going behind the scenes and learning about the process and the history. So thank you so much.
This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for these questions, which really kind of made me, dig deep, because I really do appreciate that. So thank you all, and of course it's a pleasure to be back with Slamdance. Y'all were the launch pad. You know what I mean? It was absolutely critical, for where I am now, that you all kind of were able to, in your own way, kind of resist kind of these outside pressures and really focus on the art. And I think that was, it's very likely that a film like this would have had, a totally different experience, a totally different trajectory, if there were no places like Slamdance ready, prepared to accept them, and give them a boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, many congratulations. And I look forward to seeing more of your films, and I look forward to crying while watching your films. So, thank you. Thank you. All right. Take care.